If two words, potential disruption, are enough to turn peaceful dissent into a crime, are we protecting the community or legitimizing silence? The hearing room is thick like a pressure cooker. Center frame. Governor Greg Abbott pitches the Community Protection Act. The refrain of law and order hums like background music. But on the left side of the dais, Representative Jasmine Crockett flips through pages lined with color tabs, the trace of 72 hours dissecting case law and real-world fallout beneath the glossy coat of security. Section 7.12 expose legal tripwires, gatherings of 3 or more, potential to impede, preemptive dispersal before any disruption occurs, and treating texts, checked posts calling for assembly as evidence of coordinated disruption. Translation: a handful of college students on a sidewalk, a parent with a sign outside a school, or a grandmother handing out water to protesters. Anyone could be swept into penalties for potential. The chair recognizes. The gentlewoman from Texas, Reppy Jasmine Crockett. Lenses tighten, pens stop. Crockett draws the mic closer, locks eyes with Abbott. If safety means preemptive dispersal and punishment for potential, are we protecting the community or legalizing its silencing? The common sense varnish starts to peel. The conversation is headed straight for the thin line between security and freedom. If you want more stories like this, where knowledge and composure stand up to concentrated power. Hit subscribe and join us at the Jasmine Crockett File. We bring you political moments that don't just shock, but inspire. The question hangs in the air from Chapter 1, security or silence. The camera finds Representative Jasmine Crockett, 42, stone still amid the shuffle of aides and phones, no nods, no small talk, just a legal mind setting the table. In front of her, a bill bristling with color tabs, edge notes, and flagged lines. Visual proof of a method. She doesn't jot ideas, she builds a record. A fingertip hovers over definitions, exceptions, and enforcement clauses. Each tab is a breadcrumb that leads to the same destination. What the text actually does, not what the talking points promise. While others absorb the cadence of law and order, Crockett works in the key of case law and real-world consequence. She's mapping how this language would land on sidewalks and school steps. In group chats and church basements, the room hears testimony. She reads authority and effect. The difference will matter. Soon. Governor Abbott's story is tight and familiar. Rising crime, stretched departments, fearful neighborhoods. The solution, he says, is common sense, more authority, new offenses, stronger prosecutorial tools. On paper, it sounds reasonable. Crockett flips the paper. Beneath the gloss are the pressure points. Gatherings of 3 or more, potential to impede, preemptive dispersal before any disruption occurs, and treating texts or posts that coordinate as evidence of organized disruption. That's not theory, that's practice. On a sidewalk of college students, a parent with a sign outside a school board meeting, a grandmother handing out water on a hot day. The promise is protection. The mechanism is prior restraint, and the gap between the two is where constitutional law either breathes or suffocates. The chairman glances down at the agenda, then up at the room. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Representative Jasmine Crockett, for 5 minutes. The air stiffens. Reporters straighten in the gallery. Camera operators trim their focus. Along the back wall, staffers stop whispering and look up. Those who know Crockett know this. Her 5 minutes rarely stay 5, and they almost never go where a witness expects. Crockett slides the microphone closer, measured and unhurried, eyes locked on Abbott. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Her voice carries cleanly across the chamber. "Governor Abbott, thank you for appearing to discuss the Community Protection Act. Before we get into specifics, I want to be sure I understand your central claim. You're asserting this bill is necessary to keep Texans safe. Is that accurate? Abbott nods, confident. That's exactly right, Congresswoman. Public safety is my top priority, and this legislation gives law enforcement the resources and authority to protect our communities. Crockett lets the answer sit. You've emphasized fighting crime, protecting families, supporting officers, goals everyone in this room values. Correct. A small smile. I'm glad we can find common ground. Representative. A tiny opening. Crockett steps through. Still courteous, but the edge is audible. Common ground is a good place to start, so let's talk about what this bill actually does. Not the talking points or the press release, but the text you're asking Congress to help fund. She opens the tabbed copy, fingers landing where the language turns from promise to power. If this kind of accountability and line-by-line scrutiny matters to you, be part of it. Subscribe and stay with the Jasmine Crockett File. Here, we unpack the words that shape real lives. She picked up a thick document, clearly the bill itself, marked throughout with colored tabs and handwritten notes. Section 7 of your Community Protection Act creates a new category of offense called organized disruption. Can you explain to this committee what qualifies as organized disruption? Under your definition, Abbott shifted slightly, his media-trained smile still in place. That provision is designed to address situations where groups intentionally disrupt public order, block roadways, or interfere with lawful commerce. It's common sense public safety legislation. Crockett nodded again, flipping to a tabbed page. Let me read you the actual language. Governor, since I think the American people deserve to hear what you're really proposing. She began reading. Organized disruption shall be defined as any gathering of 3 or more persons that creates or has the potential to create interference with normal activities, traffic flow, business operations, or public services. She looked up from the document. Governor, under this definition, couldn't a group of college students protesting tuition increases on a public sidewalk be charged with organized disruption? Couldn't parents gathering outside a school board meeting to voice concerns about their children's education be arrested? Couldn't workers picketing for better wages be prosecuted? Abbott's smile tightened. Those scenarios are hypothetical. They're not hypothetical at all. Governor Crockett cut in smoothly. They're exactly the kinds of protected First Amendment activities that happen every single day in Texas and across this country. And your bill makes them criminal offenses. The room buzzed with murmurs. Several committee members were now actively paying attention, some flipping through their own copies of the legislation. Abbott tried to redirect, Congresswoman, I think you're misinterpreting the intent. I'm not interpreting anything, Crockett interrupted again, her voice gaining strength. I'm reading your words, and I'm not done. She flipped to another tab section. Section 9 authorizes law enforcement to disperse any gathering they deem to have disruptive potential before any actual disruption occurs. That's prior restraint. Governor, the Supreme Court has been crystal clear for decades that the government can't shut down speech based on what it thinks might happen. Abbott leaned forward. Representative, with all due respect, public safety sometimes requires public safety doesn't override the Constitution. Crockett fired back, and that's exactly what your bill tries to do. She was just getting started, and everyone in the room could feel it. Let's talk about Section 11. She continued, not giving Abbott time to recover. This section creates criminal penalties for using social media or other electronic communication to coordinate activities that may result in disruption. She looked directly at the camera. Governor, do you understand what you've just criminalized? You've made it illegal for citizens to use Facebook, Twitter, or text messages to organize a protest. You've turned the basic tools of democratic participation into evidence of criminal conspiracy. Abbott's face was starting to flush. Those provisions include safeguards. Where Crockett challenged, "Show me the safeguards." "Governor, because I've read this bill front to back 3 times, and I've had constitutional law professors from the University of Texas, SMU, and Baylor review it. You know what they all said. They said this bill wouldn't survive its first constitutional challenge. They said it's a frontal assault on the First Amendment. And they said it's designed to do exactly what it would do: silence dissent and criminalize protest. The murmurs in the room had grown louder. Abbott tried a different tactic, his tone turning slightly patronizing. "Representative Crockett, I understand that as someone newer to Congress. These issues might seem Governor Abbott." Crockett cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "I'm going to stop you right there. Before I came to Congress, I spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney. I've defended protesters, arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. I've fought unconstitutional laws, just like this one, in state courts and federal courts. So, please don't insult my intelligence or this committee's time by suggesting I don't understand what I'm looking at." The room went completely silent. Abbott's patronizing expression had vanished, replaced by visible discomfort. Even some of the Republican committee members looked uncomfortable with how the exchange was unfolding. Crockett pressed on, sensing she had him on the defensive. "Let's talk about the real-world impact of laws like yours, Governor, because we don't have to guess what happens when states pass legislation that criminalizes protest. We've seen it before." She pulled out a different set of documents. "After the George Floyd protests in 2020, at least 17 states passed laws similar to what you're proposing. You know what happened in Oklahoma. Grandmother activists were arrested for gathering outside their state house to oppose education budget cuts. In Florida, environmental activists were charged with felonies for organizing a beach cleanup that included signs about climate change. In Iowa, disability rights advocates were prosecuted for blocking access to a senator's office while protesting cuts to health care." With each example, Abbott's expression grew more tense. Crockett wasn't just making abstract constitutional arguments. She was showing exactly how these laws got used to silence ordinary Americans exercising their rights. "But here's what really concerns me. Governor," she continued, her voice taking on a prosecutorial tone, "your bill goes even further than those state laws. Section 12 creates civil liability for anyone who provides material support to activities that result in arrests under this act. Do you know what that means if a church provides water bottles to protesters on a hot day? They can be sued. If a local business lets activists use their bathroom, they can be held liable. If a lawyer provides free legal advice to someone arrested under this law, they can be penalized." She leaned forward. "Governor, you're not just criminalizing protest. You're trying to make it impossible for communities to support each other in exercising their constitutional rights. That's not public safety legislation, that's authoritarianism." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several journalists were typing furiously. Camera flashes lit up the room. Abbott's face had gone from confident to defensive to now visibly angry. "Representative Crockett," he said, his voice tight. "That characterization is completely unfair." "And is it Crockett challenged? Let me ask you directly. Governor, under your Community Protection Act, could the civil rights marchers who walked from Selma to Montgomery in 1965 have been arrested?" Abbott hesitated, clearly recognizing the trap. The historical context is completely different. "Answer the question. Governor, could they have been arrested under your law, yes or no?" The specifics would depend on yes or no. Governor Abbott. It's a simple question. Would the Selma marchers, people fighting for voting rights, the most fundamental democratic right, Would they be criminals under your Community Protection Act? Abbott's jaw tightened. The intent of that march and the intent of this bill are completely. That's not what I asked. Crockett pressed. I asked if they could be arrested. And the answer is yes. Under Section 7, they were 3 or more people creating interference with traffic flow. Under Section 9, law enforcement could have dispersed them for disruptive potential. Under Section 12, the churches that fed them and the families that sheltered them could have been held liable. Your bill would have made the civil rights movement illegal. Governor. The room erupted. Republicans tried to call for order. Democrats applauded. Journalists shouted questions. And Abbott sat at the witness table, his carefully constructed political message completely falling apart. Crockett wasn't finished. She held up her copy of the Constitution, a move that had become her signature in confrontational hearings. Governor Abbott, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The First Amendment doesn't say Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech unless someone in power thinks that speech is disruptive. It doesn't say the right to peaceably assemble shall not be infringed unless a governor decides public safety requires it. It says these rights shall not be abridged. Period. She pointed at the bill sitting in front of Abbott. This legislation abridges those rights on every page. And you came before this committee trying to sell it as common-sense public safety, hoping nobody would actually read what you wrote? Well, Governor, I read it, my staff read it, constitutional scholars read it, and we all came to the same conclusion. This bill is dangerous, it's unconstitutional, and it has no place in a free society. Abbott tried one more time to regain control. Representative, if you would just let me explain the full context. The context? Governor, is that you're asking for federal money to fund a state law that criminalizes constitutional rights, and this committee would be failing in its duty if we gave you a single dollar for that purpose. She looked directly at the committee chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that we immediately table any consideration of federal support for Texas's Community Protection Act pending a full constitutional review by the Congressional Research Service. Several Democrats immediately seconded the motion. The chairman, caught off guard by the dramatic turn, called for order and said they'd take the motion under consideration. As the hearing continued with other members asking questions, the damage had been done. Abbott's attempt to present his bill as reasonable public safety legislation had been systematically demolished. News clips of Crockett's questioning were already spreading on social media. Within an hour, Crockett destroys Abbott was trending nationwide. Legal analysts weighed in immediately. Former Attorney General Eric Holder tweeted, "Repig, Crockett's questioning of Gov. Abbott was a clinic in constitutional law and effective oversight. This is exactly what congressional hearings should look like." The ACLU released a statement. Representative Crockett identified precisely why the Texas Community Protection Act poses such a grave threat to civil liberties. We commend her thorough constitutional analysis. Even some conservative legal scholars who had initially supported Abbott's bill began backing away. One prominent conservative law professor told Fox News, "I'll be honest. After hearing Representative Crockett's questioning, I'm deeply concerned about aspects of this legislation I hadn't fully considered. The prior restraint issues alone are constitutionally problematic." By evening, Governor Abbott's office released a defensive statement claiming Crockett had mischaracterized the bill and that he remained committed to public safety. But the political damage was done. Texas state legislators who had been prepared to pass the bill suddenly weren't sure. National Republicans who'd planned to introduce similar legislation in their states quietly shelved those plans. 3 days after the hearing, the Congressional Research Service released a preliminary analysis, concluding that multiple sections of Abbott's Community Protection Act raised serious First Amendment concerns and would likely face immediate constitutional challenges if enacted. 2 weeks later, facing mounting pressure and recognizing the bill had become politically toxic. Abbott quietly announced he was revisiting certain provisions of the legislation. Legal observers understood what that meant. The bill was dead, killed not by partisan opposition, but by constitutional scrutiny, and one congresswoman's unwillingness to let dangerous legislation hide behind public safety rhetoric. For Jasmine Crockett, the Abbott hearing became another defining marker in a fast-rising national profile, but at a small Texas town hall. She kept it grounded. "I didn't go after Governor Abbott personally," she told the room. "I challenged a bill that would have turned constitutional rights into criminal offenses. That's my job. Read the text, measure the impact, and speak when freedom is on the line." From the back row, a grandmother, once arrested during a peaceful protest against pollution near her grandchildren's school, stood with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for reading those bills so carefully," she said. "Thank you for understanding what they really mean for people like me." Someone caught the moment on a phone. It traveled far beyond that room, and it explained why Crockett's questioning cut through the noise. This wasn't about scoring points. It was about defending first principles. She had pressed past slogans and into the machinery of power, where definitions become handcuffs, where potential disruption becomes prior restraint. In doing so, she didn't merely win an exchange. She reaffirmed the constitutional promise to speak, to assemble, to petition, and to demand better. Share your take in the comments. We want to hear from you and keep this conversation aligned with our audience. If this work matters to you, like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell to hear more of these stories. And don't miss the featured video on your screen now. It's a piece we're especially proud of. Thank you for your support, and see you next time. We are Jasmine Crockett File.